Before the sun rose over the plains of Gaugamela, an empire stood still, not in fear, but in arrogance. Across the arid expanse, a sea of bodies shimmered under torchlight. Over 250,000 soldiers gathered under the Persian banner-armored cavalry. Scythed war chariots, war elephants, archers, slingers, mercenaries from a dozen provinces. And in the heart of it all, seated atop a golden chariot, drawn by 6 white horses, was Darius III, King of Kings. To the east, another force stirred, smaller, tighter, harder. Alexander of Macedon stood beneath a black banner. His force, barely 47,000, slept in their armor. They knew tomorrow would not just be war, it would be history. Because if they failed, there would be no retreat, and Alexander would not be remembered. Gaugamela wasn't a city, it was a death trap. Darius had chosen the battlefield carefully flat, wide, perfect for his war chariots and cavalry. He even ordered the ground leveled the week before to ensure nothing would hinder his war machines. He was ready, but so was Alexander. He'd spent weeks scouting the land, training his troops to counter cavalry surges, teaching them to move like water fluid, responsive, unstoppable. That night, under a dim sky, Alexander called his commanders together. No speeches, no glory talk. Just this: you are outnumbered 5-1. Their arrows may block the sun, but our resolve will blot out fear. Tomorrow, we don't fight for Macedonia. We fight so that the world remembers our names. No one slept after that. At dawn, Darius made his move. His scythed chariots thundered forward lethal machines with blades protruding from their wheels, designed to rip infantry to pieces. His cavalry fanned out, aiming to envelop the Macedonian flanks. The ground shook like thunder, but Alexander didn't move. He let them come. Then, with the precision of a master surgeon, he ordered his cavalry to peel right, stretching the line just enough to bait the Persians further. The Persians bit. They surged, hoping to outflank. And that's when Alexander snapped the trap. In a flash, he launched a wedge of his elite companion cavalry. 2,000 of his best riders directly at the gap Darius had left behind in the center, right at the king. What followed was chaos. Steel slammed into bone. Blood sprayed the air. Horses screamed. Men died with names no one would ever know. And in the middle of it, Alexander, golden-plumed and blood-splattered, cutting a path straight toward Darius. He came close. So close, they say he saw the whites of the Persian king's eyes. And Darius, for the second time in his reign, turned and ran. His royal guards scattered. His war chariots collapsed. The heart of the Persian army burst like a rotten fruit. The ground of Gaugamela turned red by mid-morning. Tens of thousands lay dead or dying, most of them Persians. Some trampled, some speared, many just abandoned. No mercy, no poetry. Just the brutal math of conquest. When the dust settled, the greatest empire in the world had been broken by a 25-year-old son of a Macedonian king. Alexander didn't smile. He looked over the corpses, the shattered banners, the burning carts. And then he said quietly, almost to himself, "What's left to conquer?" The great King of Kings was now a fugitive. Darius III, once the most powerful man in the known world, fled Gaugamela in disgrace. His golden chariot abandoned, his banners trampled, his army in ruins. He didn't look back, because he couldn't bear to see the legacy of his empire dying behind him. Alexander did not waste a heartbeat. The morning after the battle, before the vultures had even finished circling, he mounted his warhorse Bucephalus and set his eyes eastward, toward Babylon, toward Susa, toward Persepolis, but more than any city, he wanted Darius. He didn't just want a throne. He wanted the man who dared call himself a god to kneel before a boy from Macedonia, and he would chase him across deserts if he had to. Darius, wounded in body and pride, rode into the Zagros Mountains with a few loyal men. His satraps, Persian governors, watched silently, weighing their options. Some stayed, some plotted. Because when empires crumble, loyalty is a currency too expensive to afford. In Ecbatana, Darius tried to rally what remained. He sent messages to Bactria and Sogdiana. He begged for reinforcements, promised land, gold, redemption. Few came. Alexander, meanwhile, swept through Mesopotamia like a divine storm. Babylon opened its gates without a fight. Susa surrendered its treasury 50,000 talents of gold without resistance. And then Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, a city carved in jewels, a symbol of everything Darius represented. Alexander burned it to the ground. Some say it was revenge for the Persian burning of Athens a century earlier. Others say Alexander simply wanted to send a message. This world belongs to me now. But even as flames devoured marble columns and golden statues melted under fire, Alexander wasn't satisfied. Darius was still breathing. And so the hunt resumed. By now, Darius had retreated deep into the eastern provinces, lands ruled more by tribal kings than Persian order. He trusted few, but among them was Bessus, satrap of Bactria, a cousin, a nobleman, a man with ambition in his blood and a dagger behind his back. Bessus promised refuge. He promised loyalty. And then he took the king hostage. Bound in chains, Darius was no longer a sovereign but a bargaining chip. Bessus declared himself King Artaxerxes V. He planned to rally the eastern tribes under his new rule. But Alexander was too close, too fast. The noose tightened. As Alexander crossed the Hindu Kush mountains, his army barely alive from cold and starvation, he heard rumors that shook even his iron resolve. Darius had been abandoned, and worse, he had been murdered. When Alexander finally found the body, it was lying in a wagon, blood drying around a javelin wound. No royal guards, no gold. Just a betrayed king, face turned to the dust. Alexander stood there for a long time. He had hated Darius, but he had respected him. Now the man he wanted to defeat in glory had died like a dog on the road. And the dream of seeing him kneel, of proving the gods wrong, was gone. So he ordered the body wrapped in silk. He returned it to Persepolis with honor, and he buried Darius in the royal tombs, as if to say, "You were my enemy, but you were a king." But kings die, and war does not. Alexander's eyes turned further east, beyond Bactria, beyond the Hindu Kush, beyond even the maps of his own generals. The world hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Darius was dead. The Persian Empire lay in ruins. And Alexander was still hungry. He had taken Babylon. He had burned Persepolis. He had crowned himself king of Asia. But something twisted inside him. Victory hadn't brought peace. It had opened a void. Because Alexander didn't just want to win. He wanted to matter forever. With Darius gone, no man could rival his power. His generals bowed, his enemies scattered. And yet something dark stirred in the corners of his mind. He began to speak less of home and more of fate. He talked of Zeus as his true father. He insisted the oracle of Siwa had called him son of a god. And slowly, the lines between mortal and divine began to blur. Not just for others, but for Alexander himself. He pushed eastward into Bactria and Sogdiana lands of mountains, rebel kings, and fierce nomads. The terrain broke bones. The weather crushed morale. But Alexander pressed on. His men began to grumble. Some even begged to return home. Alexander responded by marrying Roxana, a Bactrian noblewoman, both to secure the land and to show his men this was no longer a campaign. This was a rebirth. He wasn't just king of Macedonia. He was now pharaoh of Egypt, lord of Persia, son of Zeus Ammon, and master of Asia. And yet, he had no peace. In India, he fought the elephant-mounted armies of King Porus. It was a brutal, muddy, thunderous campaign where rain soaked the armor and war elephants crushed men like insects. Alexander won, of course, but something had changed. His army no longer cheered. They stared in silence as their king offered Porus his kingdom back out of admiration. Alexander's thirst for conquest had become spiritual, almost delusional. He believed that he was the bridge between gods and men, and that scared even his oldest friends. At the Hyphasis River, where the known world ended, his generals refused to march further. They wept, pleaded, rebelled. They had left home as warriors. Now they were wanderers, praying for the war to end. Alexander raged for days, locked himself in his tent. But even a god cannot march alone. He relented. They turned back, but something broke inside him. Not his body, his destiny. The return journey was cruel. Through the Georgian desert, thousands died of heat, of thirst, of madness. Alexander watched it all. He no longer wept, no longer smiled. He had become hollow. When he returned to Babylon, the city greeted him with gold and music. But it was no longer a homecoming. It was a funeral march in disguise. He began drinking more. He executed trusted generals. He demanded to be worshipped as a living god. Temples were raised, prayers were offered. But the man inside was already fading. In June of 323 BCE, after a banquet and days of fever, Alexander collapsed. Some say it was poison. Others say malaria. A few whisper it was the gods themselves, ending the man who had reached too far. His body burned, his voice disappeared. And as his generals crowded around him, someone asked, "To whom do you leave your empire?" Alexander, barely conscious, whispered, "To the strongest." He died that night, age 32, and the world changed forever. No man since has matched him, not Caesar, not Napoleon, not Genghis. Because Alexander didn't just win battles. He rewrote reality. He took a sword and carved his name into the bones of the earth, and for a moment, a very brief, blinding moment, he was a god.